go ahead and I'll share my screen. And so the theory that I've chosen for this cognitive section is one that was developed by Jean Piaget. Um, and there's a couple reasons why I chose this theory to kind of discuss cognition. The main one is that this is one of the most tested theories on cognition that we've had, and one of the few theories in cognition that has been tested across cultures. Okay. And as we will see in the end, when we talk about this, culture does influence what stages and what levels of cognition we need and have in order to be successful in our lives. Okay. Or at least successful within the environment that we exist in. Um, but some of the issues with his theory, though, is because it has been tested, there's some adjustments that need to be made to it. So for the sake of this lecture, I'm going to present it as the pure theory that Piaget presented. But then I'm going to go back and kind of in each stage, I will kind of mention some of the adjustments that need to be made based on current research and current findings. Okay. Um, but the major features of Piaget's theory is he believed that he stressed the interaction of the child and the world through this idea that we actively construct our world to adapt to it. Okay. And he coined a term, and I keep forgetting to put it on the slide, known as what's known as a schema. And I don't know if I have a slide that represents that. I don't for this one, but I just want to mention what a schema is. A schema is our general representation of a thing, object, people, persons, or something, which is meant to make it so that we can easily navigate our world. Okay. The idea is if we think about the number of names an average person can remember, like the number of individuals that you can keep in your memory range from about 75 to 100, meaning that at any given time, you could recognize in your world. I'm not talking about um, uh, uh, TV stars or musicians that we're constantly inundated with. I'm talking within your world. We roughly can singly identify about 75 to 100 people. Okay. Um, and so, what does that mean, though? Because in a lot of cases, if we're at a community event or something like that, we're confronted with thousands of people sometimes, or multiple hundreds of people. And we can't go and singly give each person their own single identity with their name, their face, and expect to remember all of those people. So, what do? We start to put schemas into our world to make it easier to navigate. So, for example, usually when we walk in a room, we have the first thing we usually recognize, according to sociologists, is gender. So when we walk into a room, we tend to divide men from women. And yes, even the most um, um, uh, um, non-binary person, I'll just put it that way, does this as well. And we have difficulties when we can't put them in a category. Okay. Um, and then, so that's our first schemas for people is men, women. And then our second schema is usually dealing with age. So then we divide children and teens and then whatever age group we're in and whatever gender we're in, we're kind of attracted towards that crowd. And then we'll look at things like ethnicity, race, those kinds of things. And again, we're naturally attracted to those who are similar to us. And so we use these to kind of these schemas in at least the human context to determine those we feel safe with and those who we feel uncomfortable or potentially unsafe with. Now, if you think about this in a general sense, this works very well. It keeps us safe. It keeps us where we need to be. We get through a big meeting or a big group gathering, and we leave that. But on the dark side of it, it also is the basis for things like stereotypes that then can lead to prejudice and discrimination. So it's not a altruistic thing. It helps us navigate our world, but it does also have a potential dark side. Okay. The thing I want to state at this point is that we are born with these capacities. When infants are born, they instantly start to determine the difference between mom and others. They start to instantly prefer the accent of mothers and get very uncomfortable when there's someone with a different accent. They even at 8 weeks of age start to notice tones of skin that is different from their mother or their primary caretaker. They tend to again get a little bit skittish around and do avoidant behaviors around. Okay. So it's a cognitive process we go through in order to, in a sense, try to keep ourselves safe and unsafe. And in a very general way, it is something that gets us through life okay. But as I said, it can also lead to then the potential for developing prejudice and discrimination through stereotypes, which we'll talk about when we get to social psychology. So, but I just want you to understand the basis of it. It's a cognitive process that begins at a very, very young age. We actively construct our schemas through two processes that Piaget stated. He stated we either assimilate or we accommodate. Okay. Assimilation is when you're confronted with something that's new and it fits within the category of something you know, you'll put it in that category. You'll assimilate it. Okay. Now, to provide an example of this, I like to use dogs, right? Because in the world, there's big dogs, there's small dogs, there's yappy dogs, there's quiet dogs, there's guard dog. There's all different sizes and different behaviors of dogs, but a Chihuahua gets in the same category as a pit bull. Okay. Why? Because their similarities are more closely tied together than their differences. So a little child who has a pit bull for a caretaker, a chihuahua comes in the room, and initially the child might go, "Oh, here's something new." But then it'll notice that they both bark, they both wag tails, they both have similar features. And even though that Chihuahua is much, much smaller, they will assimilate the Chihuahua and the Pit Bull into the schema that eventually, using language, they'll call a dog. Accommodation is when something comes into the child's environment that violates their schemas. And the example I like to use of this is so we have the Chihuahua and the Pit Bull in the room, but then a cat walks in. While it has four legs, ears, a tail, it moves its tail, it does all these things, but the infant recognizes that their behaviors are much different. And this one meows and this one doesn't lick me on the face as much or something like that, right? And its behaviors and its mannerisms and different shapes of it, it can turn its ears 90 degrees or so and all of these other things. And it doesn't fit so well in the Chihuahua Pit Bull League. And so they then, through accommodation, need to create a new category, which again, when they develop language, they'll call cat. Okay. So that's kind of a simple example of a simulation and accommodation. Probably a really good example, if we think about it, is when an infant or a toddler is transitioning from a bottle to a cup. And so you kind of present the kiddo with a cup, and the first thing they might do to it is maybe use it as a drum, and maybe they think, oh, this is that loud bingy thing that I sometimes get to hit. Maybe they'll put it in their mouth and they'll say, well, it's not edible, all these kinds of things. And then mom put some water in it, but my bottle has water in it, but my bottle is something different than this. What do I do? So they throw it all over themselves and they're like, oh, that didn't work out well. But eventually they learn that a cup is something you put liquid in that then you can drink. So they've gone through a simulation and accommodation. They differentiate it from a bottle. They've differentiated it from a toy and all of these other things then to make an accommodation to call this new thing a cup. And so that's maybe a more literal example than the doggy kitty example. But that's kind of the process of a simulation and accommodation. Okay. Now, the thing that Piaget would state at this point, as far as what a child needs to experience, is that the child needs to experience mistakes. They need to be able to explore their world. They need to be able to get into things that they probably shouldn't get into and experience things that they should that maybe is wrong for that right then. And he would argue that the parent's job is to allow the infant to go through the trial and error of life in a safe way, that they don't do it in a harmful way. So, for example, you put the Clorox bottles where they can't reach it, those those kinds of things. But you don't just sit there and kind of put the kid in a bubble and not allow them to make mistakes and try to figure out how to fix their mistakes and those kinds of things. That's at least what Piaget would argue that the role of the parent is in these situations and developing good cognitive problem-solving skills. Um, Using different ideas and whatnot, Piaget came to theorize that we have four stages of cognitive development, ranging from simply understanding the world and how we interact with the world physically and sensorily to thinking about the world in abstract ways, not simple. In other words, it kind of goes with the atrophy of even an organism where we start off simple and through time and experience we become more and more complex in our thinking processes. Okay. So again, I'm going to go through each of these stages as they were discovered by Piaget, and then I'll go back and say what has some modern research shown for these different stages. The first stage of development that Piaget argued that we go through cognitively is simply coordinating our sensory experiences with our motor experiences. Simply put, it's getting to the developmental point that I see a bottle maybe or a cup in front of me, and I could physically reach out, grab the cup, and drink out of it. Okay, that's kind of the most simple kind of example of what the goal of the sensory motor phase is just the ability to interact and manipulate the world. Okay. And so what does Piaget then think? Well, what would the next phase of development be? It would be to be able to mentally represent objects in our mind when those objects aren't present. Okay. And using the technologies and everything that Piaget had available to him at the time, he found that infants and children were able to achieve this at about 24 months or 2 years of age. And let me kind of explain what this task is, which is known as object permanence tasks. Okay. What Piaget would do, and this is probably the simplest example, and you got to use your imagination for my drawing, is imagine we had kind of a curtain screen right here. So we'll kind of put some ruffles, da 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 da, and this is all red. And so, and on one side we have the child, and the other side we have Piaget. I'm not going to draw the face and everything. It would just look horrible. And so we have Piaget on one side. The infant and toddler can see Piaget, and on this side we have the kiddo's favorite toy, maybe a teddy bear. Okay. And what Piaget would do is he would say, where's kind of say, what is this? And the infant, of course, if it's his favorite, would pick it up and put it in its mouth and play with it and whatnot. But then in front of the child, Piaget would lift the teddy bear and put it behind the curtain. And then he would go do a kind of surprise look and kind of do the kind of what happened to the teddy bear? Okay. Now, they use nonverbal techniques and verbal techniques by about two. Infants can kind of use a little bit of language. I'm going to put it in words just to kind of simplify this. Is the infant would basically say, "What teddy bear? What are you talking about, dude?" And what they found in more complex research is that by before about 2 years of age at this time, when something left a infant's sensory ability to sense it, it no longer existed. Okay. And yes, this is a little bit of parenting advice. This is why it's important when you take your infant to the babysitter or leave them with a stranger. You give them a blanket with your smell on it. You give them a so that you don't leave them there and all of a sudden you don't exist. Make sure they have something that gives some of your sensory abilities. Even a picture of you to the babysitter is helpful. Just kind of some advice, unless you don't like your babysitter. Um, she won't, he or she won't babysit after that, but that's another story. So, but what Piaget found is that around 24 months using his experimental design is that around 24 months of age, and again, I'll use language to kind of emphasize this, the child would basically say, "Hey, dummy, look, it's underneath this curtain. It's right there where you just put it." Now, what does that task take? That task takes an infant being able to hold an object in their memory mentally. So this means that they're starting to mentally represent their world according to Piaget. And this is where he believed we go from the sensory period to the pre-operational period of development. Okay. Now, again, more modern research has shown that infants actually get object permanence much earlier in age, and they do start symbolizing things at least on a non-linguistic level as early as about 5 months of development. Okay, so it's not quite 2 years. Believe it or not, your 5 month old is getting at least emotional and physical representations to objects. They just don't have the language to tell you, yeah, mom, I remember where you put your keys. Um, so 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 his timeline is a little bit sooner than 2 years of age, but definitely 2 years of age, children are developing language and symbolizing their world and giving linguistic meaning to a dog, a cat, a cup, a teddy bear, and those things. Okay. And as I mentioned time and time and again in this class, how much symbolization do we do? Well, we do between about 30 to 50,000 symbols. Remember, by about the age of 6 or 7, that's the average number of words children have retained or know. Okay. So this pre-operational phase is about symbolizing the world, about getting an understanding of what the world is and giving things labels. Because this world is very overwhelming with all this stimulation that is now being stored in the brain, this leads to some hallmarks of the pre-operational phase. One is what's known as irreversibility. Okay. For many children, and again, we'll mention younger ages when we're done with this, they have the inability to, for example, recognize that if you take the tires off the car, you can't put them back on again. Okay. This is what's known as irreversibility. And this is why a lot of, especially early childhood educators and child cares and preschools, like Legos. They like the blocks that you could build things with because it gives children the opportunity that, hey, all the Legos can be taken off, but they can be put back together again. And it kind of helps, quote unquote, train the child to not think that once something's taken apart, it can't be put back together. Okay. Centration and egocentrism, if you think about all the stimulation and everybody is coming to them and teaching them things and everything else, we tend to think that the world kind of revolves around us. So children during this age experience what's known as centration, which leads to egocentrism, which is this notion that the world revolves around me. It's here for me, and I'm what matters. And if you notice, a lot of children have difficulties when they first go into childcare or preschool, and they didn't have a lot of siblings. They have a very difficult time sharing, for example, because again, without those life experiences, that egocentrism kind of naturally takes over. I should note that there are two periods in our life that so far in research we have found were the most egocentric. One is the age of about 2 to about 6, and the second one is in adolescence. Those are the two periods of life where, at least in the places it's been measured, we tend to find egocentrism as a hallmark of that developmental period of time. Okay. So what should we say about this and about symbolization? I've already mentioned we start symbolizing our world at a younger age according to current research. But let's go on to the next phase that Piaget mentioned, which is the concrete operational phase. What is necessary to start, for example, understanding the world in categories and whatnot? Well, it requires us to notice that things don't change if they don't change shape. Because they change shape, they may not change mass. That's conservation. It also requires us to mentally manipulate information. So the classical tasks that Piaget came up with is a conservation task and the three mountain tasks. So let's look at these a little bit more closer. I'm going to start with the conservation task, and this is kind of the most classic example where we have three beakers. A and B are the same. And then C is a different shape. This one, in this case, it's taller, right? And what Piaget would do in front of these children is he would pour the same amount of liquid in A and B and ask the child, is there the same amount in A and B? And children of verbal age in any age group would say, yeah, duh, yeah, they're the same. But where it became different is Piaget in front of the child would pour the contents of, let's say, B into C and ask the child again, now is there the same amount in A as C? And what he found is that children under the age of 6 or 7 would say, no, there's more or less now. It wasn't until the age of 6 or 7 where children recognized that the liquid just conformed to a different shape, but it's still the same amount. So they would correctly say, yes, there's still the same amount of liquid in A and C. They're still equal. And what does this require? It requires a child to be able to recognize that volume doesn't change even if it goes into a different size or a different form. The other classical example is he would use two balls of clay, and this sometimes is a little bit clearer. And you got to imagine, because I didn't draw these the same size, he would ask, are these the same? And the child would say, yes. I wouldn't, but let's make believe. And then he would maybe take the second one and he would squish it on the ground. And then he would ask, are they still the same? And just like the beaker example, the child under about the age of 6 or 7 would incorrectly say, no, there's more or less now in the second one. It wasn't until about the age of 6 or 7 that the child would correctly say, no, it's still the same amount. You just squished that one. Okay. So this is conservation. And then the second one is what is known as the three mountain task. Okay. So what he had is he had a table and he had these kind of three mountains. He had a dark green one, taller and skinny, and then a medium green one, which took up the whole table. And then behind that, he had a kind of a thicker light green mountain. Okay. And what he would do is Piaget, and sometimes it would be mom or someone the child knew, would ask the child, what does the child see? And the child would correctly say, well, I see this tall light green one, and then the wider one, and then I see this slimmer dark green one behind it. Okay. But then Piaget would ask, well, what do I see? Okay. And again, incorrectly, children under the age of 6 or 7 would say, well, you see this light green one, this medium green one, and then this dark green one. Okay. Which isn't correct. That's what the child sees, not Piaget sees. At about the age of 6 or 7, the child would start to say correctly, well, you see the dark green one, the medium green one, and then the light green one. Okay. And they would even get it correctly. So this is actually Piaget's left side. So they would correctly say this is on your left side and this is on your right side. Okay. And so what does this task require a child to do though? While as adults, we really don't think about it because we think about it instantaneously. But what this task requires is for the child in their brain to kind of, if you want to imagine this, pick up the table, turn it 180 degrees to see what Piaget is seeing. So it requires them to take a different perspective that they haven't seen before, but they can do it in their brain. They can mentally manipulate and rotate to figure out what Piaget is seeing in this task. And it was this age where Piaget recognized that thinking changes too to what known as the concrete operational phase. In the concrete operational phase, we put things into very solid categories, hence the term concrete. But in order to put them in that categories, we have to operate on them. We have to experience them. We have to mentally put things into categories. If you want to put it this way, we have to put the Chihuahua and the Pit Bull in a solid category of dog because of their mental manipulative similarities. Okay. Um, and if you've worked with children between this age of about 7 to 11, they do exhibit very concrete thinking. There's good people, there's bad people, there's cops, there's robbers, there's white, there's black, there's red, there's pink, and there's purple, even though red is in all of those. There's very separate categories. Hence, during this age, and I bring up the color example of red, pink, and purple. This is why a lot of teachers start to do the mixing of the color thing in order to see that these aren't necessarily fixed categories, that there's pink in the world and there's red in the world, but they're a blend of each other. That's why that example is used, because they're trying to help the child understand that the world isn't just red, pinks, and purples, that they're really a blend of different colors. Okay. So, um, but in this phase, it is very concrete. It is very there's good and there's evil in the world, and there's no line where these two things cross. Okay. However, in the formal operation phase, which I wish I had a good example of this was done using paper pencil analogies to see it comes with a classical moral challenge. And let me rehearse this for you for just a second. One of his moral challenge, which was also picked up by a person who studied this named Kohlberg. But this is kind of one of the tasks he wanted to see a child going from concrete to formal operations. Is, let's say, um, uh, your wife or your partner needed a medication, and they needed this medication tonight, or they're gonna die. This medication is life-saving and whatnot, but you can't afford it. It's way out of your pay range. You can't afford it. So what the person does, I shouldn't put it in you. You're evaluating the situation. So what the person does is he goes and breaks into the pharmacy and steals the medication for his wife to save her life, or his partner. The question is, should he be held accountable for it? Should he be arrested? Here we have a moral dilemma. He saved a life by committing a crime. So who deserves retribution? The pharmacist, by the person going through the legal system, and the pharmacist who has to feed their family and do all those things that they need to do to survive? Or should he be seen as a person who saved his partner's life, someone he loves, someone he cares about, and values that? If we're in the concrete operational phase, we're either going to take the hero story and say he should absolutely not um, have consequences. He's a hero and there should be no consequences. Or we can take the he stole, he's a criminal, and so he should have consequences. Okay, so in this case, we have a moral dilemma. Um, in the concrete operational phase, we're going to take one side or the other. In the abstract moral area of it, in the abstract formal operations, we're going to kind of debate about it. Well, he did the right thing. So, yes, he should be held accountable, but not accountable to the level of defining him as a robber or a thief. Maybe he should do some community service and pay back the pharmacist and any damage he did broken in. But in the end, a life was saved and things will be okay. Or you can take the other end. He should pay the consequences. He saved his wife, and that's good. But we do need to follow the law, so he should have consequences. But those consequences should be understood based on the reason he did it, not the character he has. Okay. And that's kind of the difference between formal operations and concrete operational thinking. And what he found is that basically right around adolescence, individuals transition from this concrete operational to this formal operational way of thinking. Now, I want to make this a little bit more complex given modern research. Okay. We have two levels of thinking. We have level one and we have level two. Level one is our quick, rapid decision making. It is what makes it so if a car's about to hit us, we can react very quickly. If someone's about to harm us, we can move out of their way really quickly. It's a very quick decision making, easy decision making process. Okay. Process two is that slow, deliberate analysis of things. It's that slowing down and really consciously focusing on something and analyzing it deeply. Okay. The majority of the time, we operate in level one cognitive processing. Why? Because it's easy. It doesn't drain us. It's very simple. Um, and in general, it gets us through life. Okay. But level one thinking is susceptible to concrete, rigid category thinking. This is where, for example, I'll bring up some social research right now. This is why when we cognitive load someone, meaning we make them think while they're interacting with someone different from them, they will act very stereotypical and in a lot of times discriminatory and prejudice. And let me give you an example of this research. It was done by Shelley in the 90s and early 2000s. Is she had participants come into her lab. Some measured really high in prejudice and discrimination, and they were okay with those scores. They knew they weren't trying to hide it. And then she had people who measured very low in discrimination and prejudice, who believed everyone, regardless of skin and color, language, what gender, should be treated fairly and whatnot. But then she tested them. For some participants, she just asked for them to go down the hallway and grab some papers for her and just bring them back. The task is that on the way back, Shelley would have a Confederate drop something in front of the participant. That Confederate was someone of a different race, gender, ethnicity, someone that was different from the participant. Okay. And in that task, the prejudice people that measured high in prejudice, they would act very prejudiced. They'd laugh at them, scoff at them. They wouldn't provide help. They even made some racial slurs or some sexist slurs like "you clumsy woman" if it was a man, those kinds of things. The people who measured low in prejudice and discrimination would either say nothing, they'd just walk around them and go about their business, or they would stop and help them pick it up and help them along their way. The second situation she put participants through was different, though. Okay. In the second situation, she would have them go down the hallway and back, and she'd have them do something cognitive loading. So, for example, she'd have them count from 1,000 to zero in fives, sevens, and twos. So they would have to go 1,955, 9,995, 9,807, 9,873. And so if you can imagine, that's very kind of cognitive loading. It takes up a lot of kind of those things. And she'd have them go down. So in this case, this person's system two was being fully used, fully engaged. Okay. And what would happen is, regardless of their measure on prejudice and stereotypes, both groups acted prejudice or discriminatory. They acted, whoops, based on these concrete categories. Geez, these concrete categories that we develop in life to understand differences between people. And then, based on our experience with our own culture and our own system of thinking, that also carries the stereotypes with it. And both groups, regardless of their level of altruism and non-prejudice or high prejudice, both groups acted discriminatory and prejudice. So, what does this tell us? First of all, formal operations operates on system two. The second lesson I hope that it teaches us is that in order for us not to regress to the concrete operational phase and act discriminatory and prejudice, we should be aware that we need to be free and able to use our system two to make judgments. Okay. Another good example of this is the Good Sermon research. In the Good Sermon research, they took individuals on campus, and let's say they told them that they were going to give a lecture, and these were sermon students. These were students who were going to come up and teach theology, be pastors, and those kinds of things. And they were going to go do a talk on the Good Sermon, the story of the Good Sermon in biblical terms. So this is where they were going to give the lecture. And they had them practicing in a building that was kind of across campus, maybe over here or somewhere. We'll even put a door on it. And what they told some participants, they would come into the room, so they would start at the same time and start practicing their speech and whatnot. And then they would take them into another room. Okay. Let's say it takes 15 minutes to get from here to here. And let's say that it was 12:45 when they would bring the different individuals into the room. Some of the individuals said, "Oh my goodness, we messed up on the time. You need to be there by 1 o'clock, which is 15 minutes away, and you really should show up a few minutes early so that you can get set up and prepared." So technically, if he left here, he should be over here by like 11:55 or 11:50, but it's 15 minutes. So this person would take off and dart, right? Other people, other people that came in and said, "Okay, no worries. Your talk is actually going to start at 2 p.m." But you probably should start heading over there. We noticed there were some crowds starting to build up just so that you can get in and get started. And so these guys just kind of took a leisurely walk, da 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 da. But along the way, we had another good example of a Confederate. Sometimes the Confederate would feign a heart attack, so they grab their heart and go to the ground. Sometimes a seizure. Sometimes it was a social issue. Maybe it was a person that presented themselves as homeless and needed some money to get to the soup kitchen. So they presented different helping scenarios. So now here we have seminary students who hope to someday either be pastors or priests or theology teachers, and they're going to give a talk on helping, on the ultimate Bible story of helping. Okay. So here we are. We have people that are loaded up with level two thinking, but one we stressed and the other we didn't. And what we found is absolutely none of the individuals that were going to be late stopped to help the person in need. It was only about, and this is almost another kind of sad number, but it is higher, about 65%. So it's higher, it's above 50%. 65% of the individuals who were not rushed and were just meandering to the lecture hall would stop and help the person. So again, what does this tell us about even things like helping behavior outside of stereotypes and those kinds of things? One, this person is doing system one or system level one talking. They're in a rush, they're cognitive loaded, they're stressed, and so they go back to concrete operational phases. And in this phase, category sick person, avoid. Category homeless person, maybe criminal, lazy, avoid. We use those stereotypes again, and we use those categories then to rapidly judge whether we should get involved with a person who is in need or not. Okay. So these are some examples. I just wanted to bring this up because these two stages can get a little bit more complicated. We can go from one to the other depending on what cognitive system we're using to make judgments or decisions. Okay. All right. To finalize this part, I'd like to talk for just a minute about culture. Um, because one assumption is made, mainly based kind of on this conversation, I'm sure, that the ultimate base of thinking would be formal operations, because this is when we see that a person can do bad things, but they also can have good qualities, that a cop is not always right, that people in power can make very bad decisions, even though they're claiming to do the good for the people. That parents are not perfect. They make mistakes, and children do too. But that doesn't make them who they are. Okay. So it gets us away from that uh, black white thinking of good and evil, and there's separate categories that really it kind of cuts down the half of all of us, and we all have the potential to do good or bad dependent upon the situation that we're in. But in general, we do know that predominantly culture plays a role in this. So if we look at how we go when we've gone to different cultures, and we've looked at what stage of development they make it through using these different tasks and whatnot. We find that the majority of people in the United States tend to be fixed in the concrete operational phase. In fact, when we measure this, 75% really don't are not able to use these abstract formal types of thinking. In the pharmacy thing, they either say he's a good guy, he saved a life, or he's a bad guy, he should go to prison. Okay. In Germany, it's almost different about, again, I think it's somewhere, I can never remember the exact number. It's somewhere between 70 to 85% of Germans make it to formal operations. Okay. Um, and then when we've gone to, for example, some pre-agriculture societies, where think of uh, people in the Amazon, the indigenous individuals there that haven't been largely touched by Western society, we find that they make it, and I'll use an A for Amazon. They get to measure around geez, around stage two, the sensory, the symbolization phase. And it's tempting to say that does that make Germans better than Americans or people in the United States, I should say, because Amazon is in the Americas. Sorry about that. And does that make these two groups better than individuals in the Amazon? And the answer to that would be no. Okay, and I want to explain this. Why is it that most individuals in Germany make it to the formal operations phase? It is because of their complex intellectual history. If you think about where's the famous people who did the atomic bomb, Einstein, Freud, all of those individuals came from, they came from Germany. But Germany also had a pretty rough 20th century. They kind of got us all into World War One and World War Two, and there was this division between German and non-German. And if you were non-German, you were the enemy. But if you're German, and there was this big movement of nationality. So here you have this very intellectually rich country producing some of the greatest minds of the time, going into this very concrete thinking between German and non-German. And either you're with us or you're without us. And since then, and since Reconstruction of Germany and everything else, they have come to the notion that we can't see things in good and evil. We can't see things that someone is better or less than us. We can't think that way because us thinking that way led us to do some pretty bad things as a country. Okay. So this is what kind of moves, this is what you need if you're going to be a German in Germany. This is what you need to kind of survive in that environment. Okay. Here in the United States, here in the United States, though, the best way I can think about this is you probably have heard this over and over is we're a land of laws and rules. What you need to know to survive in the United States is what to do and what not to do. And pretty much that's a road to success in survival. Now, it's not a promise of income and happiness and joy, but it's the base of survival that in the United States, you just need to know that if I stab someone, there's going to be consequences. Or if I do something wrong, there's going to be consequences. And that's pretty much to survive what you need to know. So concretely, that works very well here in the United States. Now let's go to the Amazon. Okay. In the Amazon, what do you need to do? Well, you don't want to put everything in categories. You want to be able to tell minute differences between very diverse objects. So for someone like me here and stuff, if I went to the Amazon and I picked up a leaf and I said, "Could I eat this leaf?" A person from the Amazon would say, "Absolutely not," and they might hand me another one that to me looks exactly the same, but they would say, "But you can eat this one." What do they need to know? They need to identify. The thing about the Amazon is its changes because it's a tropical zone. And so the topography changes. So you need to be able to recognize minute changes in trails and river flow and those kinds of things to get from one place to the next. It requires a large amount of symbolization that then you don't want to put similar items into specific categories. Okay. And so let me bring this up right here. Again, would one of these guys survive in the Amazon? The answer is no, unless we brought our navigation devices, our GPS devices. We'll need to bring our own food. We'll need to bring our own water. We'll need to bring all of those. And even with all those technologies and resources, we will probably need a local guide to make sure if our technology isn't working right, someone will be there to tell us this is where you should be. So these guys are the most intelligent in their environment. Okay. And so, one of the things that I want you to recognize about cognitive development is the environment in which the person needs to survive in determines this cognitive skills that are necessary to survive within that environment. And so, cross-culturally, the thing I want you to think about is one stage better than the other? No, yes, maybe. In our modern world, we got to keep in mind we have this system one and system two. And given this fact here in the United States, it shouldn't surprise us because we're mostly operating on system one, the level of prejudice and discrimination this country has produced. Um, and maybe after we've even though we've already done some of the horrifying things that Germany did in a very short period of time as well, maybe someday we will start using our system two a little bit more and get beyond this idea. Um, so that is Piaget's theory. And I just realized I've just talked for an hour and 15 minutes. So let's do this, gang.